maritime, land, air, and even space domains are visible and tangible. We can point to a map and locate where the most pressing geopolitical tensions are and situate where on the map that involves entities are. We can even narrate how these tensions occur by drawing the different demarcation lines or maritime routes which exist as the consequences of geopolitical dynamics. But what happens when a new technology emerges and renders many geographical limitations obsolete and disrupts our conventional understanding of international relations? Pioneering users of the internet would declare that governments are not welcome on the internet. But really, how does that argument hold against today's reality? Nation states are increasingly tightening their grip over cyberspace. Today, many states have declared the cyber domain as the fifth military domain. This reminds us that the internet might be virtual, but the infrastructure that holds it together is physical. Geopolitical tensions in the Indo-Pacific have increasingly demonstrated such entanglements. Examples from the South China Sea is a good example, wherein studies have indicated that perpetrators from different claimant states have instigated attacks on each other, with allegations of these attacks being state-sponsored. Tensions surrounding Taiwan have also made it vulnerable to attacks, prompting them to enhance cyber capacity. So, how does the cyber dimension really become relevant in discussions on international security and geopolitics? How does cybersecurity become relevant in discussions on geopolitical tensions in the Indo-Pacific? And how does an actor as prone to geopolitical dynamics as Taiwan manage cybersecurity risks and achieve resilience? My name is Mabda, the moderator of today's webinar, and I'm happy to welcome you on today's Talking ASEAN webinar titled Cybersecurity and Geopolitical Crisis, Lessons Learned from Taiwan. We are very pleased to welcome three distinguished speakers. First, we have Mr. Barho Gavin joining us from Australia, Mr. Adi Suteja from Indonesia, and Dr. Cheng Yiswo from Taiwan to discuss the nexus between geopolitics and cybersecurity within the context of the Indo-Pacific and Taiwan. Participants are more than welcome to raise questions or provide comments through the live chat feature on YouTube. Without further ado, I would like to introduce our first speaker. We have a presentation from Dr. Cheng Yiswo, who currently is an Assistant Research Fellow at the Institute for National Defense and Security Research, which is a nonpartisan research organization affiliated with Taiwan's Ministry of National Defense in Taiwan. He also serves as an adjunct assistant professor at the Tam Kang University. His research primarily focuses on cognitive warfare, Chinese influence campaign, digital surveillance, cyber warfare, AI in defense, and the military's role in cybersecurity governance. He also regularly participates in Track 2 dialogues. To Dr. Zeng, you have 15 minutes to present, and now the time is yours.
And let me begin by expressing my gratitude for having me here today. Today, I'm gonna addressing cybersecurity and the geopolitical crisis, taking the lesson learned from Taiwan. But my presentation actually primarily focus on how Taiwan draw lessons from the Ukraine war this year, and also there's Chinese military exercises surrounding Taiwan during this August. Taiwan has been prepared since last year, but these two big events serve as an enabling accelerator for Taiwan to get ready to enhance Taiwan's digital resilience in coping with geopolitical crisis like this. And let me introduce a little bit about where I'm from. I'm working in an institute for national defense and security research, which is fully sponsored by Taiwan's Ministry of National Defense. That said, we are nonpartisan. Of course, our defense matters are all political and nonpartisan. But what is special is that our own writing or dependent thinking is not and cannot be interfered by our Ministry of National Defense. That I can guarantee because I'm there. So next, please. Next. And the question I'm gonna address today twofold. One is, in what ways have a geopolitical crisis related to cybersecurity in Taiwan? And the second is, how has Taiwan addressed the geopolitical risks to cybersecurity? And as the picture has shown, one is the backbone internet system damaged by Russia. Russia Gary shell, and the second one is regarding the undersea cable, which also tells us a little bit difference between the situation what happened in Ukraine is may not be applied. The lessons drawn in Ukraine may not be totally applicable to Taiwan. And the takeaways from the Russia-Ukraine war, we may move to next page. Next, please. First one is the secure backup in space really matters. We learned that there's a cyber attack upon a communication satellite before the eruption of the war in Ukraine, the real satellite incident, and then the supply of SpaceX is also under serious cyber attacks, and there's also a potentiality of physical interruptions, like debris and other objects that might crush the communication satellite in the orbit, in the space orbit, like Starlink's low Earth orbit communication satellites might be obstructed by Russia. Third is that there might also be a potential attack upon communication satellite, meaning big powers may use the space weapons or through other means to sabotage the communication satellites, and thereby the running of the backup running of the internet on Earth. And next, please. Next page, and next one. Yes, thank you. And but we also learned that sustainable internet, the running of the internet, the operation of the internet is no easy task during the geopolitical crisis. There might be physical damage to backbone fiber networks in the land or underseas, and your cell towers might be sabotaged, and but more critical and more importantly is the power supply. Your electricity power plant might be damaged and destroyed. So the power supply is critical. There, for most cell towers, there might be backup fuel to make the cell tower operational for another maybe 4 to 8 hours, or some even to 12 hours, but it cannot last that long for weeks. So power supply is one big issue that we marked in the notes from the war in Ukraine. Also, Taiwan is surrounded by oceans, so undersea cable is the single most significant line of communication, and but we learned from the Nord Stream, although that's gas pipelines, but still we understand that based on the open source information, that China also has some deep sea experiment submarine that has some robot arms that can also do the harm to the undersea cable line. So we keep that in mind and try to prepare that during the peacetime. Next, please. And there are some other ramifications, like in the global cybersecurity governance. Ukraine has requested the ICANN to remove Russia from the top-level domain, and that effort has failed, fortunately, and it's good because it should never do that, and that's what Taiwan has been worried. What China might have done to Taiwan in the future, and there's also one export control of chips that is deeply concerned with TSMC in Taiwan. Russia is now shortage of advanced chip. Um, Not for long, their combat field battlefield management system and C4ISR will be under a serious influence because of the shortage of chips. So the similar effect, similar consequence would also be applicable to China, since now the US is also initiating the high-tech decoupling from China. So China may be also under serious consequence. Next, please. So what Taiwan has learned is that we need to have a resilient internet, and again, we are already resilient and really resilient. Otherwise, we cannot. The internet system cannot survive until today, because even as we are speaking right now, Taiwan is under serious cyber attacks. So we are under tens of millions of cyber attacks on a daily basis, and our critical infrastructure is also under DDoS or APT attack every day, and what we worry is not that much about the DDoS attack, but those deep-seated, infiltrated APT. We know no news is no good news in cybersecurity field. So we do prepare. We do not expect that nothing will happen. We expect something big will happen, but we have to embrace the impact and be ready for the storage, for the recovery of the internet system, and have the backup data to run, to make the system operational as in a normal to the normal status. So we are not only try to have a rapid recovery, but we hope we have a non-stop internet system. So we do need to have a backup system, and we do need to have the backup system, including the hardware, to be secure in a physical space, maybe in some cave, maybe in some hardened physical shelter. That is something we take very seriously since the late this year, and particularly since the beginning of this year, after the eruption of the war in Ukraine. The Taiwan's government in Taipei is making every effort to try to race with time to speed up our preparation. because in Taiwan, the strategic thinking is that cybersecurity is national security issue. That tenet has been there since 2014, and we adopt a whole of government approach to cope with malicious cyber attack, but still those preparations are not yet reaching out to have sufficient and efficient digital resilience in place. Next, please. And we are also aware of, actually we have been issued a warning, but we are aware that BGP hijack is also at issue, and Ukrainian government has been prepared to reroute the internet. And in Taiwan, we have established a newly established Ministry of Digital Development. The Minister Audrey Tang, I think it's well noted, very well known. She advocated a heterogeneous network that to make the most of the resilience, try to maximize our digital resilience. And for the backup system and the data, for the data part, for the part of data, we also try to learn from Ukraine to have the cloud data center abroad. Although there are some political and technical issues to be resolved, but we believe we will figure something out rather sooner than later. And as I said before, our military has been taking it seriously to try to find the backup plan, the backup for the backup plan. I mean, we try to have a hardened physical shelter for the backup system and the backup data storage. And finally, we try to have a rapid recovery of our internet system and to make the most of the heterogeneous network. And we also try to make the civil defense at work. So we will use the civilian sector to support the backup fuel for the power supply of cell towers, and including military cell towers. Next, please. So the lessons for Taiwan is, first of all, now almost everybody is talking about undersea cable protection. That is costly, let me be clear. But for the sake of resilience, particular cybersecurity resilience, sometimes you have to have a redundancy system, and that already is costly, it's expensive. And the repair of the undersea cable, we didn't have that capacity before, and we try to build up some limited capacity so that we have our own capability to repair undersea cable in a speedy rate fashion. And as far as the secure undersea cable is concerned, what first comes to mind is, of course, the landing reception stations. We have 4 reception stations on the land of Taiwan, and we try to enhance the physical protections from the potential malicious sabotage by the adversary spies, or so-called fifth column troops. And And we also have many times of rehearsals, and sometimes we put that in. We have the tabletop exercise first to identify the gap and the problem, and then figure out the way to fix it and put it to test in a live exercise. And of course, to to a bigger scope, the Clean Network. We joined the initiative of the U.S. Clean Network. So as you have already noticed, some undersea cables now connect to Taiwan rather than Hong Kong, because Hong Kong is now under tight control under the so-called National Security Act. Next, please. And we totally get that resilience matter, but resilience cannot be built overnight. So now is the time to get started. Better earlier than later. But we also learned that we are in a very shortage of high shortage of satellite communication satellite, but strategic communication to outside world and to domestic people. When your cables are sabotaged, undersea cables sabotaged, cell tower inland sabotaged, then you need a satellite. So we try to build and figure out a way to make the most of use of the low Earth orbit and the middle Earth orbit communication satellites. Next, please. So I think I'll stop here, leave it at here, and turn the floor back to the chair, and hope for the further discussion. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Dr. Seng. It was really impressive to see how you noted that seeing examples from the Russia-Ukraine war. It reminds us that the consequences of kinetic or physical conflicts are very much present and might disrupt access to cyberspace. And it's interesting to see how you draw parallels between what is happening there with recent concerns in Taiwan. And I also find it interesting how the range of measures Taiwan takes to ensure resilience is also very much informed by the geopolitical concerns that you guys have. So it was really interesting to see how I believe that these points will make for an interesting discussions later on. And I think we can move to our second speaker, who will provide a much broader perspectives on examples that we have heard from Taiwan. So we have Bart Hoogeveen joining us from Australia, who is currently the head of cyber capacity building at the International Cyber Policy Center at the Australia Strategic Policy Institute. He has years of experience supporting states, particularly developing states, with building national cybersecurity strategies, enhancing their ICT capabilities, and providing assistance with bolstering regional mechanisms to ensure stability in cyberspace. He is also very much involved in Track 2 diplomacy on cyber issues in ASEAN. And his presentation will discuss how cyber issues have entered international security and geopolitical studies. And again, participants may type in their questions and comments through the live chat feature on YouTube. And Mr. Hoogeveen, you have 15 minutes to present, and please, you may take the screen. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Selamat siang, selamat sore, Ibu Mabda Fajrilla, Dr. Teng. Terima kasih for the invitation. Thank you so much. It's a real pleasure to speak to you from Canberra, and congratulations on this month's event, which is really exciting. And thank you, Dr. Teng, for your introduction speech and kind of giving us examples from Taiwan and kind of how not just kind of the local security context, but also kind of the things that are happening almost on the other side of the world is affecting not just kind of physically what's happening on the network in Taiwan, but I think also the risk perception in our part of the world. In my presentation, I wanted to touch on a couple of things, three things in particular, to kind of have a reflection on kind of the current security environment and kind of the role that cyber plays in the current security environment. I wanted to have a look at what's kind of the current international settings in kind of governing cyberspace, and in particular what's been happening at the level of the United Nations. And then finally, I would like to say a few things about, I think, what we see happening in our part of the world. Some things which I think are really reassuring, but also I think some concerning developments. So maybe let's first go back to yesterday, when I think President Jokowi, as the chair of the G20, I think was very fortunate. And I think it's a real achievement to actually get to an agreed communique by the 20 leaders of the G20, where they talked and where they agreed to talk about a couple of things. The kind of the devastating effect that COVID-19 had on our economy, on our societies, but also on our kind of political security situation in the world. They talk about climate change and how that's affecting a whole range of things, but also our efforts in poverty reduction and achieving the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And I think quite notably, they talk about the war in Ukraine that had adversely impacted the global economy. And the G20 leaders, all 20 of them, subscribe and deplore in the strongest possible terms the aggression by Russia against Ukraine. And I think that in itself is I think, very noteworthy. And I think that the presidency, the chairman, should be really kind of complimented for that. But also for the fact that they couple that with the statement that it's really essential to uphold international law and the multilateral system. And I think that's kind of what binds us all together, no matter where you are in the world, whether you're a small country, a big country, whether you're an emerging economy, a developed economy, or a developing economy, kind of that international system based on laws, rules, and norms is kind of what really binds us together, or at least what should bind us together. So in that regard, I think it's a really kind of a very noteworthy accomplishment by this year's presidency, and also we're looking forward to next year's presidency, which will stay in our part of the world, with India chairing the G20. So that part about the multilateral system, I would like to kind of focus a little bit on what's been said lately in the ASEAN context around that. So in ASEAN, for a few years now, in the absence kind of a proper structure within the proper ASEAN framework, there has been this forum which is called the ASEAN Ministerial Conference of Cybersecurity that has been meeting, if I'm not mistaken, since 2016, every year under Singapore's chairmanship. And also they, last month, talked about strengthening the rules-based multilateral order in cyberspace, which as a collective responsibility of all the ASEAN 10 and all the ASEAN ministers responsible for cybersecurity. And they talk about the rules of the road, which require deliberate and consistent effort. So I think these are kind of really important kind of markers where ASEAN and kind of where our part of the world stands around cyber and how that relates to both economic security, but also international peace and security issues generally. Now, if we look at, I think, at the international security climate, and I think the previous speaker already kind of alluded to that, it's not a great place to be in at the moment. If you look at what we call kind of state-sponsored cyber operations, so these are operations that have kind of a link to a state intent or an intent by a foreign state, we see kind of a growing trend, and in particular from 2015 onwards, we see kind of a big exponential report incidents from 40 a year to over 100 a year in the last few years, and even I think in 2022 we have already kind of collected more than 100. Why is it very significant? Because they are state-sponsored or state-orchestrated or done by state entities. And I think there is this understanding that if states meddle with kind of cyber operations and kind of exploit vulnerabilities in the system, that's particularly serious because that kind of compromises the integrity of the system. I think that partly Dr. Teng talked about, and maybe Pakadi will also touch on that kind of how that is really kind of affecting our sense of security and how it's affecting businesses and kind of individuals. How do we and how we make use of that digital system, also in the context of our digital economy. So when we look at cyber in the context of international peace and security, I think we're now looking at a couple of kind of ways in which that's being used. It's definitely used kind of for espionage purpose, occurs within certain boundaries. There is evidence of cyber being used as part of military operations. We've seen that in a few declared situations in the Middle East, for instance. And I think one of the most renowned operations is the degradation of the communication network for ISIS in Syria a couple of years back. There have been incidents of what I would call kind of standalone cyber operations, where states are involved in very particular niche operations, either to stop another state from developing certain capabilities or for financial gain. And then finally, which I think is really important for our part of the world, is to take note of is kind of what's happening in the domestic space. And I'll talk about that in a second a bit more. But we see that kind of all of our countries, whether we like it or not, have been in the business of developing national cyber capabilities, national cybersecurity capabilities, also by our security forces, be that the military, the police, the intelligence services, or others. So I think generally we see the role of cyber really being acknowledged as a part of our national defense, as part of our national economy, as well as kind of our broader strategic outlook. Ibu Mabda talked about in his introduction about the fifth domain of warfare, which is true, but it's much broader than that as well. Now, if we look at how this has been invested kind of in the international domain, I think we cannot escape to talk about kind of the efforts that have been undertaken for the last 20 years at the United Nations, which dates back to 1998, which was the first time that, in this case, the Russian Federation put the topic on the agenda of the UN General Assembly. So in 1998 is also the year when both the US and Russia were acknowledged to have established their first kind of cyber units, be that for espionage purposes, reconnaissance purposes, or for military operations. So that's already a long time ago. And over the years, the UN member states managed to agree on a whole lot of things. They also still disagree on a whole lot of things, but they also managed to agree on a whole lot of things. And a couple of things I think are important to note. So they kind of have met, let's say, since 2004 onwards, and they have agreed kind of on four main items. One is, I think, which is foundational to anything that we do, is that international law applies to what states do in cyberspace. And that's generally acknowledged by all UN member states, all 193, including the permanent 5 members of the UN Security Council, be that the US, UK, France, China, and Russia. So that's really fundamental. International law, the UN Charter, applies to whatever states do in cyberspace. Secondly, there is the agreement that on 11 what they call norms of responsible state behavior in cyberspace. So these are kind of 11 voluntary non-binding norms that describe what states should and should not be doing in cyberspace. Again, I can show you probably on camera. This is kind of an image. I hope you can read it. Otherwise, you can definitely find it on the internet. But which looks at a couple of things that states should do, particularly should do, so not so much shouldn't do. So one is you should be involved in international cooperation. So all states are called upon to engage in international debates at the diplomatic level, in terms of police-to-police cooperation, in terms of CERT-to-CERT cooperation, so the computer emergency response teams of the different nations that are really encouraged to work together and to share information amongst one another. So one of the, I think, most kind of contentious issues is always kind of the issue of attribution, so holding another state responsible for a cyber incident. And what the norms say is that you shouldn't really jump to conclusions. So the fact that, for instance, a presumed incident originated from IP addresses in Indonesia doesn't mean that the state of Indonesia is responsible for that incident, but that there might be other reasons why that particular kind of attack vector was channeled through IP addresses or through infrastructure in Indonesia. But I think there are two really important ones to highlight here as well. One is that every state has a responsibility that their territory is not being misused for what they call internationally wrongful acts. So that means that actually the UN has agreed that states should exert some kind of governance over what's happening in their internet domain at the national level. And also there is a positive duty to protect your own critical infrastructure. So when we talk about, and I think when Dr. Cheng talked about, let's say, about what infrastructure, what key sectors of our economy, what keeps our society kicking, we need to make sure that they are protected up to a decent standard of security, so that if there is an incident somewhere else or in your own territory, that these services are not being kind of inadvertently affected. which also means kind of in the context of international peace and security that an attacker is able to distinguish between legitimate targets and non-legitimate targets, and that they can differentiate between targets. So there was international law, was the norms of responsible state behavior, and there were two other items, which is an agreement to engage in confidence-building measures, which is really much about kind of sharing policies, having a dialogue, and also having kind of a points of contact directory so that I know who to call in case there is an incident. And finally, a collective and global effort to support nations in building their cybersecurity and cyber capabilities. So this kind of overall capacity building effort that the UN members have agreed to. So that's kind of the current layout. It's as I said, been in the works for almost 20 years. It had been reaffirmed recently earlier this year, but it's still being debated. And there have been a few attempts to kind of undermine or kind of differentiate from the original agreements, but they've been kind of very minor. And the debates are currently ongoing, let's say, in terms of how to make some of the agreements more specific and more tangible for states to operationalize and to implement, and also to establish some processes where states can demonstrate how they are compliant or how they are observing these current agreements. So the final thing I just would like to kind of reflect a little bit on is kind of how we are dealing with this in our part of the world, so in the Indo-Pacific. I think it's quite striking to see that all of our nations have developed certain cyber capabilities within government and also within the security services of government. And not just kind of the usual suspects like Australia, the US, China, but also India, which has a defense cyber agency, Japan, who just this year announced the Self-Defense Forces Cyber Defense Unit, Singapore, which this year established the Digital and Intelligence Service with a clear role to be involved in intelligence and kind of cyber defense of the nation. Malaysia in 2019 established its Cyber Command and a Cyber Warfare Signals Regiment. The Philippines has the armed forces of the Philippines have a cyber group. Vietnam has a cyber operations command, and also Indonesia has the TNI's Satuan Cyber as a kind of a military cyber unit. Now, I'm not implying that they're all kind of involved in kind of malicious operations and kind of in extraterritorial activities. But I think it does signify two things. One is that we all have these capabilities within our security forces, but also that in some countries, in terms of kind of policy and doctrine, some of the militaries have started to conceptualize how they would use cyber in national defense, in military operations, both in a kind of in an interstate context, so let's say in defense of the nation or in foreign operations, but also very much in a domestic context. And I think that's where we see the majority of developments in our part of the world, where national security cyber capabilities are being used for internal purposes, whether that's for content control, for interference with the networks, surveillance, etc., etc. So I think it's evident that kind of cyber in a relatively short period of time, from kind of our local level up to kind of the international level, has been recognized as a domain of international peace and security and of geopolitics. That said, I think in terms of diplomatic statements, there is still kind of a big divergence between what states say in these forums and what they do in practice at home, where, for instance, the non-alignment movement is still kind of calling for the demilitarization of cyberspace and doesn't really want to acknowledge that cyberspace is a domain for political and military activities, which is, of course, very understandable in terms of where they're coming from. But I think there is a growing disconnect with what we see happening globally and what we see happening locally as well. I think I'll leave it at that. So those were my 4 points. Thank you. Back to you, Mabda. Terima kasih.
Great. Thank you so much, Mr. Hagevin. It was really interesting, and you noted how cyber means are employed and how they vary as well, and how state actors enter into discussions on cybersecurity, and you particularly mentioned the 4 points which nation states at the UN level have generally agreed on or discussed about, such as the applicability of international law, the 11 voluntary norms on responsible state behavior. And in this respect, I believe that ASBI has made tremendous contributions in advancing discussions on this regard, confidence building measures, and cyber capacity building as well. And it's interesting to see just how much cyber issues, particularly cybersecurity and defense, have been increasingly institutionalized. And just the variety that this process takes form is just so interesting to see how it unfolds in the Indo-Pacific. And next, of course, last but not least, we will discuss and take probably a much more focused issue on the regions, particularly in the Indo-Pacific and Southeast Asia. I would like to call Mr. Suteja, the chairman and co-founder of the Indonesia Cybersecurity Forum, which is the only nonprofit professional multi-stakeholder organization in Indonesia with a specific focus on cybersecurity and cyber resilience. He has held several positions in both the public and private sectors, as well as in academia, and his 28 years long experiences within this field have made him among the first Indonesians to specialize in cybersecurity. And his extensive experience will surely be valuable as we discuss how do cyber issues factor into geopolitical tensions in the Indo-Pacific and Southeast Asia. And of course, his experience, which spans from the public sector, private sector, and academia, will provide a novel insight into our discussion today. And again, I would like to remind all participants that you may raise questions or comments on the YouTube live chat feature. And now, to Pardi, you have 15 minutes and the screen is yours.
Thank you so much. And first of all, let me just express my appreciation to the Habibie Center for inviting the Indonesian Cybersecurity Forum to be part of this discussion this afternoon. And I also like to give my thanks to my colleagues, panelists, Dr. Zhang and Bart, whom I met before. And I mean, I totally agree what Dr. Zhang was outlining, and also Bart, as you know, my presentation this afternoon is you know, almost similar to what they have already mentioned. But I will also talk about something which I don't think that much has been discussed, yeah, from different perspectives. But please do allow me to start my presentation from my computer. Okay. So when we talk about geopolitics, this is a very heavy subject. Yeah, I'm not an expert in geopolitics, but I have been seeing a lot of things in the world changing quite rapidly, and how geopolitics can have influenced many decisions and many we call disruptions, yeah, around the world, which is using cyber capabilities. Yeah, so this is what we're going to discuss. And Dr. Zhang also already touched base on the technology aspect of the disruption, and you know, Bart also touched base on a different aspect. But I'm going to focus on something which is slightly different. And everybody mentioned that you know, the fifth domain is the cyberspace, but there is actually a sixth domain which not many people really realize that it does exist, which is what we call the cognitive domain. And this is one of the most disturbing aspect of the cyber disruption, which is not affecting almost everyone in the world, not only politically, not only in government, but also in the consumer's mind, the people's, the common people. So I think this is very important that we touch base on this issue, because it can in the long run affect everything, that the way we think, the way we act, and of course the state of readiness, how we respond to various different disruption that's you know, really going to you know, make us difficult in the long run. Okay, let me just start with the presentation. And of course, I totally agree with Dr. Zhang that cyber disruption in any form to critical infrastructure, everything that lies in it, our economy and so on, it is a state, is national security matters. So we have to look at this a very serious aspect, yeah, very seriously, because it relates to human life and also business continuity. Yeah, it affects everything that we do on the daily basis as well. And when you talk about cyber, yeah, you cannot avoid talking about everything that is digitalized. Yeah, and unless you see the everything from the top view, you cannot understand or really make a point about what you are actually looking. Situational awareness from helicopter view is very important. Yeah, if you don't look at the issue from the top view, then I don't think you have a good perspective on what is really going on. Yeah, and of course, history factor is very important to understand situational awareness. Unless you know the historical factor of the digital era, you will not understand how things will evolve and how technology will evolve, what new technologies is coming into the pipeline, and what are the weaknesses of the technologies. So history is very important. Now, let's talk about geopolitics. This is something that is becoming a very, very popular discussion. Yeah, I think Bart is also focusing on this issue. He's more tune in into this area. But of course, Indonesia itself is also now being part of that global geopolitical influence. Yeah, we are also what we call being disrupted, not only in terms of politically, but also in technology choosing or technology selection, because there's so many technology now available in the world, but of course there are only few technologies that's now available in Indonesia, because of not only the influence of the technology company, but also of course there's also an interest from the state, state actor to also to push the technology being used in our countries. Yeah, so this is an issue that we have to really look at very closely. The other matters is well, of course, we came to know if there is a disruption. Only we came to know when there is already being printed in the news. Yeah, the issue about cyber disruption, this is a real threat and it is a real risk. It's not a matter of if, but when. So we are not in a waiting game. When is it going to happen? So we've never been prepared to face the risks. Yeah, and if that is the issue, then we are going to face a bigger problem than ever before. The other issue, if we talk about Indonesia, we are a new kids on the block. Yeah, Indonesia, of course, we know the risk is there. We know the threat is there. But look, we are still having various issues to catch up with the other neighbors. We have we only have the cybersecurity agency, which is called now BSSN, established in 2017. So now it's 2022. We still have a long way to catch up with Australia. We have a long way to catch up with Taiwan. We have a long way to catch with Singapore. But of course, we're trying our best to really catch up by discussing this issue. Not only bilaterally, but also multilaterally, and of course, through this kind of dialogue, is going to enhance our knowledge what we are going to do next. The other issue that this is equally important, why I mentioned the cognitive dimension is the sixth domain of the cyber warfare, because as you know, when you talk about cyber disruption, there are three layers of being targeted by tech. First of all, everybody, Dr. Zeng have mentioned a lot about hardware, and software, but not many people actually discuss something about the cognitive aspect of the cyber disruption. Because this is what happened when it is actually affecting a lot of people. There are already specific cases that's happening not only in US but also in Europe. But this is also now become a biggest threat to Indonesia as well. So this is why I think this is very important for us to discuss. The other thing, cybersecurity is not magic nor a vaccine. No technology, whatever in what form, can solve all the problems we are facing. Indonesia is also prone to various different methods of attack and hacking. We have been experiencing the same form of attack everywhere in the world. So, but bear in mind, it is not a magic or a vaccine. Yeah, this is what we have to remember. The other thing is the root cause of the problem, the global problem, everybody knows, is about global political distrust. This has now been increasing with the conflict in Europe, in Eastern Europe. Yeah, I won't mention names, but this actually has some effect as well globally, including Indonesia. And of course, we have witnessed the recent G20 meeting in Bali. You know, the effect is there; it's been felt as well. And of course, the other thing that propelled this disruption is also the global conflict, not only in Europe but everywhere in the world. Yeah. Dr. Zhang just already outlined what Taiwan has faced and how they managed to manage the threat. Yeah, and this is also some big issue now. You mentioned also something about the semiconductor crisis. That's also affecting everyone in the world, including Indonesia. We might be facing a shortage of computers and laptops very soon. Yeah. So the other thing is also the post-Cold War era. Yeah, there are more state actor, you know, that can be identified or cannot be identified. That's now becoming a player in the real world and as well as virtually. Yeah, and of course we know who they are. Yeah, the state actor are the same people over and over again, and the same countries that we know. But bear in mind, all these countries are trying to survive, and they also try to their best to manage what other threats and risks they are facing in the world. Yeah, Indonesia is in the between of all this conflict. This is why for us it's very important to understand the whole conflict, geopolitical conflict from the helicopter view. And the other thing that we must also understand when we talk about cognitive disruption is what we call the social engineering. Yeah, we have an abbreviation very popular now in Indonesia. We call it SOCENG. Very easy to remember. SOCENG is an art of replacing what works with what sounds good. This is an old craft. Yeah, in deceiving people. So now the old craft is being used to deceive people by using technology. Yeah, in terms of the content engineering and so on. And in the long run, people are led to believe something that they are not supposed to believe, and that's the problem we are now also facing. And of course, the weakest link in everything that we are now facing is, of course, the human being. Yeah, this is when I mentioned earlier that no technology can solve the problem. Of course, we have to start with the human capability first. Indonesia, like any other countries in the world, we are also facing shortage of good talents, qualified talents in the field of cybersecurity, not only in the civilian life but also in the military. So we have a lot of catch up to do with the other countries that's already ahead of us. Yeah. The other thing, of course, techniques. Yeah. When we talk about techniques of social engineering, there are various different aspects of techniques of social engineering, but I won't go through all this because it's going to take a long time of discussion. Cannot be discussed in 15 minutes, but it's very important just to understand what the phrase or the terms are being used to describe the techniques being used for social engineering. Yeah. And of course, social engineering is very dangerous. It can alter your mind. It can alter your belief. It can alter your sense, the sense of sensitivity. It can alter also your mindset. So that's why social engineering in the cognitive disruption dimension is very, very dangerous. Yeah. And of course, social engineering is now everywhere. It has already entered into the policies making of the government. It has already entered the physical domain. Almost everything that we face, that we do, is now already being penetrated by social engineering. Yeah. And of course, no one is immune to social engineering. All the big Fortune 500 companies in the world have gone through this experience in various different forms. They have lost money. It's also crippling a lot of economies throughout the world. That's why it's becoming a national security issue. And of course, social engineering can lead to influence operation, as Bart rightly mentioned. Is a part of now an espionage operation to really influence the policy making, in various parts of the world. Not to mention also Indonesia, I think also now experiencing that effect, And of course, the impact is quite large. It's quite heavy on not only physical impact, but also psychological impact. Distrust of the public toward the system, the technology is very important to understand. And also financial impact is there. And of course, when you experience cyber disruption, it really open your defense, very widely. Everybody known that the vulnerability is there. This is what happened when we've been attacked. For example, there is different data breach that is happening in Indonesia almost every month. That actually has opened we call it the can of worms. How weak our cyber defense are. And what are the objectives actually from all this exercise? Of course, what they want to obtain is all what we call PII, personal identifiable information, which is stored not only in the computer system, but also in your cell phone, consumer gadget, and other things that we are now that we use to work and also to communicate with one another among families, also within the work cycles. So this is what actually is being targeted. And why is this being targeted? Because in the long run, a lot of this information, once you are processing this information, can be profiled. Can be profiled, and they can find out who was doing what are the weaknesses, and so on. And of course, this is one very important aspect of understanding that a lot of the cyber disruption cannot be abolished through regulations. All the Western countries have very, very strict rules and regulation in place, but they still, they are still fall victim to a lot of the cyber disruption. So I don't think the answer is in the regulation, but we have to look somewhere else. Where's the weakness that we can close the gap? And of course, a lot of the cyber disruption techniques and everything that is penetrating, attacking us, is never in a single form. It is always minimum in two forms. One intended to be discovered, the other one not to be discovered. This is what we have to understand. That's why when you talk about cyber disruption, cyber attack is very complicated and very, very big issue. It cannot be discussed in very, very short time. It took quite a long time to discuss the issue. The other thing, the cycles. Bart mentioned about espionage. Typical. This is the cycle that we face when when hackers are trying to infiltrate any network. Same thing also applies to social engineering. They always look for the weaknesses to penetrate, and they study the weaknesses. They cultivate the target, and of course, they influence the target once they have already know all the weaknesses is there. Now, it is complicated. It is quite challenging. So, how do we overcome it? This is a big question. It's being asked for many years. How do we overcome this? Well, my simple idea of understanding and how to overcome it, of course, I have mentioned earlier that we have to see everything from the top view, on the helicopter view, to understand what we are facing. Unless you see everything from helicopter view, you will not know what you are facing. So you have also to understand how to mitigate the matters. You have to understand what's there, what are the weaknesses, who are the players, who are the actors, who are the insiders. This has to be understand, otherwise you don't know what you are facing. And there's also another new approach, which is now very popular in the tech world. It's called zero trust. But one thing about zero trust is actually already embedded in each of us. We actually been taught about this many years by our parents, but unfortunately, because due to the development of technology, we forget about it. And what is that? exactly. Our parents used to teach us not to talk to strangers. Yeah, when we were little, but unfortunately, due to technology, we forgot about the basic teaching of our parents. So when we talk about mindset, we used to build fences around our home to prevent thief, yeah, or bad people coming to our house. But now with the technology, that mindset has changed. The thief or the bad people are already inside your house in the form of technology. Yeah, your handphones, your set-top boxes, everything, all the technology that we use in our home actually can be a tool that can be weaponized. Yeah, and of course, if you want to overcome this, you cannot rely on other people, but you have to really build your own capabilities to understand what you are facing, including the risk you are facing. So we have to build our own capability to really develop our understanding and how to overcome the risk that we are facing. And of course, no one is going to judge you if you have cyber incident, but how you respond to cyber incident is very important. That's why when Bart mentioned about CERT, yeah, this is also very important task for the computer emergency response team, is how they respond to a lot of the incident that they are handling. Are they equipped with the full team? Yeah, it's not the consumption only technology people, but you have a full team. You need also expertise, multidisciplinary expertise, including people from the communication industry, like the PR guys. You need them, to help communicate with the public. As Dr. Zhang rightly mentioned, this is also very important. Unless you have the team, you will not be able to manage incident and the crisis that you are facing. With that, of course, I like to call everyone that when we face the global challenge, it's not the sole responsibility of the government, the private sector, or the expert. It's I think when we face a lot of these challenges, it's becoming now a collective responsibilities. Yeah, it must involve everybody in the discussion. Otherwise, we'll not find a solution that can be that can really manage the crisis that we're facing. With that, I conclude my presentation, and thank you so much for having me.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much, Bardi, for your presentation. You pointed to how we have to catch up in improving our capacity gap, which I totally agree with, and that reminds me of the fact that the 80 Kearney report you referred to outlined that states in ASEAN, and that includes Indonesia as well, still dedicate a very small percentage of their GDP for cybersecurity. And this reminds us that we have to move fast. As you mentioned, that the question we have to address in addressing cyber issues is, it's not a matter of if, but when. And I think that is aptly demonstrated by the Bjorka accident that we recently suffered from. And it's impressive to how you argue for taking cognitive factors into account and outlining the dangers of social engineering. And you also takes us through how we are vulnerable to cyber attacks, which reminds us that cybersecurity is not just a national or international concern, but also a personal concern as well. And therefore, we have to be responsible of building our own cyber capability. And so thank you for your presentation, and for all the three speakers for your great presentation. And now we will move on to the Q&A session. And we have several questions already on our YouTube live chat feature. And the first one would be from Marina. He specifically addresses the question to Pak Ardi, but I believe that I think all of the other speakers can jump in as well. In the context of Indonesia, which still needs to continue improving its cybersecurity, what are the key elements that Indonesia should improve to achieve cyber resilience in order to prevent or mitigate potential cyber risks? So, Padi, you might want to start with answering the question, please.
Thank you. That is a good question. Yeah, I actually been working on many initiatives. Yeah, with in concert with BSSN and also with the MICT ministries. Yeah, on various aspects of human talent development. And of course, this is something that must be done. Must be must be planned carefully, because the aspect of catching up involve how to develop the proper human talent to really manage the potential vulnerabilities that we are now facing. Yeah. So this is one of the area that we are also focusing in concert with our partners, government partners, and of course we also involve people from the universities as well, because this is a multi-stakeholder issues that we must face. So that's one of the area. The other area, of course, we also now need to understand the various weaknesses, yeah, apart from the human talent gap that we are facing, is also the more frequent and more complex threat environment, yeah. And of course, we are now facing also the influx of new technologies into the market, which we have to admit a lot of these technologies are not indigenous technology developed by Indonesia. It's a third parties technologies, and we know nothing about this technology. So this is also another area of vulnerabilities that we're facing, that we are now faced and been given a technology that we know nothing about. Yeah. So this is also becoming a big issue. And the other thing that this is, I think, not only Indonesia centric, yeah, but it's also something that's happening everywhere in the world, is regulation always behind the growth and development of technology. So this is also some area where we need to really collaborate with everyone to really get everybody on the same page. Yeah. But of course, this is the challenge in doing so. It's not easy task, because we are also not only facing knowledge gap, but also generation gap. So this is something that we need to work and find a solution together, and it cannot reside in one single person, or nor in one single agency or one single organization. But of course, this has to be a collaborative effort among all the stakeholders. I hope that will answer the Bu Marina's questions.
Yeah, that's certainly helpful. And I think it's interesting to know that you mentioned about generational gap, which I think is quite prevalent in many of the sectors that are responsible for this issue. And I think Bart can also join in and maybe take a much broader perspective, linking with your engagement with several Southeast Asian governments. How would you see, what are the key elements that states, particularly in Southeast Asia, should improve in order to achieve cyber resilience in preventing or mitigating cyber risks?
Yeah, thanks for that question. I mean, I think it first starts with kind of an appreciation that no one is starting from scratch. So I think there are some very decent capabilities and existing infrastructure that's there, and I think partly it's kind of a representative of something I think which is very typical for Indonesia, where you have a very lively kind of non-governmental community which is very active in the debate, which you won't see referenced in kind of government communiques or in policy documents, but I think which is really important and a testament of kind of resilience of the community at large. And I think you see that across kind of Southeast Asia. So that's one thing. The other thing is that I think across Southeast Asia, and definitely all ASEAN member states have their kind of national their national CERT, or the National Cybersecurity Center. So there is BSSN in Indonesia, obviously, and I think over the last couple of years we've seen a few national CERTs being merged into national cybersecurity centers. That went for Vietnam CERT, which is a very capable entity, that happened with Cybersecurity in Malaysia and the National Cybersecurity Agency in Malaysia, and also with Thai CERT, which has recently become the National Cybersecurity Center in Thailand, which I think signifies that from an initial kind of core role of dealing with incidents, and in particular incidents that affected government networks, they took a more kind of expansive role in being a cybersecurity center, which to me is kind of an entity to which people and businesses and companies can refer back to, saying, well, give us advice, and kind of push out advisories into the community, and in particular across the economies. Whereas I agree that let's say in our part of the world that's still kind of in an early stage, it is happening, and it is happening, I think, very, very rapidly. I think where we're all struggling with, and that goes for Indonesia as much as for Australia, is kind of making sure that kind of from our capital city, where everything is kind of concentrated, we really kind of manage to reach out into our economy. and not to the big companies because they are fine, but really to kind of our small and medium enterprises. And that's really hard. That's really hard to kind of to make them aware of their vulnerabilities, their risks, but predominantly give them tangible advice, and kind of tangible kind of tools to improve their security, without saying go to a very expensive cybersecurity company to solve your issues. So I think that's the challenge across the board, and I think that's also where regional cooperation in ASEAN, with ASEAN and kind of partners in our neighborhood, is really instructive. And I think the final thing is, and I think also there Indonesia has done some really interesting work through BSSN, is kind of, do we have a proper understanding of what's really happening? There are all kinds of these rumors and kind of, I think you were kind of talking about earlier today about thousands, if not millions, of attacks on a daily basis. That doesn't give you kind of a real image of kind of what's really affecting. Yes, it is kind of a number. But I think getting a proper understanding of what's really happening, to what extent businesses are affected, and kind of also try to understand what are the trends, what are the real issues that we are confronted with. Thanks.
Great, thank you, Bart and Paddy for the answer. And I think that brings us nicely to the next question to Dr. Zheng. How has Taiwan engaged the private sectors in ensuring cyber resilience, and how has it benefited from its domestic ICT companies? Understanding that there are lots of really ICT companies with substantial values in the global market share. So how has the dynamics been between the public sector and private sector in Taiwan?
Yes, can you hear me? Yes, okay. Since, as I said before, since year 2014, we have a national priority to focus on the development of cybersecurity industry. And that is not just for our national security concern, but also to develop another dimension of high-tech industry. So at first, of course, there are huge barriers. In other countries, sometimes you have to have another branch to kind of blend in the local so-called localization. But then all the business, the private sector can figure out a way. Regarding the incident reporting, I think everybody's in every country, it's still a dilemma that each and every government and the private sector has to confront. Of course, once you report an incident, then there's a huge amount of daunting red tape. Regarding the incident, pardon? Should I continue?
Yes, please go on.
Sure. And so but since Taiwan is facing the daunting challenge regarding the cyber attacks, the actual major real estimate of the loss in the business sector is uncertain yet, but because of the what I just mentioned, the incident report is incomplete, and probably if it's incomplete, sometimes they may try to minimize the impact they have suffered. So maybe sometimes misleading. I would put it very blunt. But so far, not many small and medium-sized businessmen have the kind of experience to report to the incident report center. However, the social engineering, the kind of attack is frequent. Is actually almost every staff, every worker, either in the private sector or in our think tank, particularly in my division, very high value target, and of course the government sector.
almost everybody has met maybe at least once of the kind of a social engineering threat. But I would say that it is the training, individual training, and education is the key for the cybersecurity, particularly in the prevention and the precaution, for the matter of precaution. And that would be the best way to mitigate the damage. That's the consensus so far in Taiwan, that we, first of all, we raise the awareness regarding not just the cyber attacks, the cyber security threats, but also the kind of the disinformation threat initiated by China. I think Taiwan is well noted for being under attack, not just from cyber attacks, but also from disinformation campaign initiated mostly from China. Of course, attribution, the precise attribution, is a pain in the neck. Somehow we have a certain level of confidence that it is from China. That's why I can point a little bit finger at this moment. So I will leave it at here and turn the floor back to the chair.
Thank you, Dr. Singh. I think you make a really important point about attribution as well as engaging with counter-regulation as well. And I think that sort of links us really nicely to the next question from Farah, which I believe that all speakers could answer. And the question is, how do you see the role of social media industry or social media companies in influencing global cybersecurity landscape? And I think particularly this is relevant with what is going on nowadays, but I think this is really, really relevant in terms of how content regulation has become especially relevant in discussions on global cybersecurity as well in several countries. And of course, I think theoretical wise, this links us to how there were debates on the differences between cybersecurity and information security. And so I think all of the speakers can jump in and answer. So I think I would like to start with Bart, please.
Yeah, sure. Throwing the difficult question to me first. Thanks for that. I think you referred to a very important point, which I think is very telling, kind of how we look at the problem. This kind of tendency, for instance, I think mostly in the West, to look at cybersecurity from a nearly purely technical lens, whereas many other economies, many countries look at it, let's say, more comprehensively through the lens of information security. So kind of the common language in kind of the UN is also ICT security and not cyber nor information security. But I think over the last couple of years, we've seen, I would say, kind of a convergence of perspectives on this matter, where this whole idea of the misuse of the information environment, so the cognitive elements in Pakardi's speak, it's become really seen as a problem and as a potential threat to the cohesion in our society. So the things that are being said and pushed by outside forces and sometimes state orchestrated or industrialized on our social media platforms, it's become a real concern, which is kind of widely acknowledged. And I think that's where we still struggling to find the right balance between kind of the freedom of expression, the freedom of media, and the responsibility of technology companies, in particular kind of the social media platforms, and what's their responsibility, and what can government do responsibly in kind of managing that. And I think also there we see a difference in approach between managing that or regulating and controlling social media companies. I think a very interesting phenomenon that occurred, I think mostly after the Christchurch attack in New Zealand, where a extreme right shooter attacked a few mosques in New Zealand, which was live streamed on one of the social media platforms. And I think that was one of those trigger moments where everyone realized we can't kind of stay in this usual kind of conundrum of saying, oh, the social media companies are responsible for that, we don't touch it. No, actually it has real life effect. And I think that's where there was, in the context, I think also of the G20 or the G7 at the time, an agreement that social media companies and governments need to kind of somehow work together to make sure that those kind of extremely bad things don't happen. And I think that also led to a recognition that some of the concerns in countries like Indonesia or in Malaysia or in Vietnam have been taken more seriously, that disinformation and the spread of hatred and extremism online can become a national security issue and needs to be addressed. The question how to address it in a responsible manner without infringing on human rights, without infringing on privacy, and without interfering in kind of the integrity of the networks, I think that's still a discussion we are having at the moment.
Great, thank you. And I think you made a really interesting point on how it has entered the lexicon of Indonesia's government that certain content is indeed a threat. And I think that brings us nicely, maybe Pardi can also answer how do you see social media platforms or social media companies play a role in securing cybersecurity or global cybersecurity landscape. And I think particularly taking a look at what the measures that Indonesia has taken so far. I think there were lots of really interesting points that you can raise. Pardi, please.
Thank you. Yeah, this is indeed, I agree with Bart, very, very important question and issues, yeah, that has to be raised. I think the context is applied globally, yeah, about this issue, yeah. The problem, I think, when we talk about the internet, you know, I actually, you know, I used the internet during the early days, yeah, when the connectivity was still using you know, a crude modem, using a telephone line, and the speed was like what, 14.4 bps, you know, very, very slow. But back then, a lot of us who are the early adopter of the internet, you know, we have actually an ethics, yeah, an ethic and common understanding among us that there are ethics, yeah, unwritten ethics that we have to obey and to understand and respect, yeah, which is known. I mean, back then was called netiquette, yeah. But unfortunately, I think no one is really paying attention to that anymore. They think, you know, the internet is free; they can do anything they want on the internet. But bear in mind, the people who developed the technology of the internet, you know, they didn't have a thing that there will be a lot of misuse or abuse of the internet. So this is also something that was not being properly taught then and development, and it's been left like that, you know, ever since. No one is doing anything, you know. Somebody trying to mitigate through regulatory approach, but it doesn't work, you know. And of course, you know, we are also facing people from the human rights camp saying different things. But bear in mind, whatever's being published on the internet, you know, the digital footprint is still there. You cannot erase it. And it's some of the content in the internet are very disturbing. And you know, I mean, you know, somebody has to really have an accord among all the tech company, all the players, to come to understanding how it doesn't mean regulating the internet means it's also infringe on the human right. It's not like that. We have to also put forefront, yeah, the interest of the public and the public safety must be put in front. Otherwise, if we just you know, ignore all these issues, I think the demise of the internet is really in front of us, you know, and I think very soon it's going to become you know, a new conflict that we never even ever thought about before. So I think it's, you know, I mean, you know, the awareness must again be built. It must involve not only the users of the internet, it must involve also the tech companies. Yeah, everyone who's involved in the technology must be involved in you know, figuring these things out. It's not a country-centric issue, but this is a global issue that you know, that has to be discussed. Otherwise, of course, we're going to face bigger problem than before.
Thank you, Pardi. That was a really excellent point, and I think you highlighting the fact that there was this illusion that the internet is an anarchy is an important point, because it really isn't. It really isn't. Who who will ensure that the internet is safe and secure if there's no sort of regulation that maintains and ensure that security is maintained throughout? And of course, I think this question about the role of social media platforms is also relevant with Dr. Tsang's previous point on misinformation and disinformation, and particularly the importance of a certain state, a particular state, on launching all of these alleged misinformation and disinformation campaigns. Could you please maybe provide a perspective on this from a Taiwan context, please?
Yes, I think Taiwan is a unique case because, as I said, we at the very beginning treat the disinformation campaign, the so-called malicious content, as a national security issue. So that follows that the very unexpected consequence is that the government in Taipei bring all the giant tech platform into line and to comply with the government for the fact check. But most important of all, we are a consolidated democracy, and we are a divided society, which is a normal state for almost every consolidated democracy around the world. So people only pick what they want to listen to. They choose to believe what they want to believe. So if it is only the government integrate with private sector platform, that wouldn't people wouldn't buy in. It wouldn't cut. So we need to have a multi-stakeholder approach. We use instead of going beyond just whole of government approach in dealing with cybersecurity risk, in dealing with disinformation campaign or this content fact check, we go for a whole of society. We incorporate the civil society groups. So they are different kinds of social civil society groups. Some are pro opposition party, some are pro ruling party, etc. So fight with everybody. So you can organize all kinds of fact check agencies. So we have multiple fact check agencies, and then they have to build up their own credibility. It cannot be built overnight. So over the years, government, private sector, and civil society groups gradually we have at least 3 to 4 big fact check agencies that earns societal trust, and that is the way we deal with the kind of social engineering and the malicious content. We cannot, because we are democracy, we cannot really regulate the content or to do that based on ethics. We are a society that is rule of law society, and so we have amended some role to deal with when there's a disaster emergency and the disinformation may cause the loss of life. It's a matter of life and death about a human. There might be harm to human life. So then that's the point that we we activate the role. In addition to that, we use the multiple stakeholder approach, the whole of society approach to deal with the fact check, and that makes us some kind of, according to some countries, Taiwan is a best practice for that matter. But still, we have a lot to learn from Southeast Asia, from ASEAN countries, because as I said before, people in Taiwan are strange. The idea that disinformation might do harm to human life is still a strange idea, not familiar for Taiwanese people. we treat that as a national security issue. That's not true, because in most of the world, disinformation or the malicious content, those hatred speech that may cause the death, the loss of life, that is something that people in Taiwan need to grapple with, and to improve a little bit about our practice, so that in the future we still have a lot of insight to share with each other. That's part the point that I want to raise.
Thank you, Dr. Tseng. I think you made an interesting point on balancing between the ethics and security, which I believe has also been highlighted by the previous speakers. And I think that's sort of connected to the next question from Greg, which depart from the knowledge that in the past few months, or throughout 2022, several cyber incidents has occurred in Indonesia, which caught wide attention, not only from Indonesia, but also abroad. What lessons can be learned from them? And do you think Indonesian government has started to really address this problem seriously? And the next question is also linked to that. Greg also asked if someone says that Indonesian government is a lot more concerned with domestic issue vis-a-vis external threats. Would you say that you agree with that statement? And if so, do you think that would be the same mindset applied in the cyber field? Maybe Pak Ardi, of course, can start by addressing these questions, please.
Thank you for that good question. Yeah. First of all and foremost, I'm here not speaking on behalf of the Indonesian government, but I can relate that question to what I believe can be done. Yeah, because I believe in the concept of collaborative approach to managing issues and that we face every day. So the collaborative approach is not only the responsibility of one single entity in the government, or the private sector, or anyone. It has to be done in concert with all the capability that we have, and it's not really true that I don't think our government's only focusing on domestic issue. Yeah, of course, it might seems that way, but in reality, I think the government has been doing a lot in terms of the international arena, especially our Ministry of Foreign Affairs has been in various discussion and various international meetings relating to cyber issues, on the UN level as well. We also, in the Indonesia Cybersecurity Forum, we are also involved quite extensively in various different discussions, in meetings. Also, we are also engaged with a lot of international partners, and of course, we work with similar organization in various countries. So I think it's not correct to say that no one's doing anything. Yeah, we are doing the best we can. Of course, we are also facing a lot of constraints, especially when you talk about cybersecurity. We're also facing talent gap, shortage of expertise. Of course, we are now in the process of catching up as well. Yeah, we have a long way to catch up, and of course, this is a process that we have to undergo. And I think everybody in the world also face and undergo the same process. But bear in mind, it's not a quick approach, but it requires patience and understanding in facing this issue. Of course, the issues and the incident is happening almost every day. Of course, we need to address that as well. But my understanding is we're learning by doing. This is the approach that I think our government, the industries here, a lot of the private sector, the universities, the academias are adopting this kind of approach. I hope that will answer the question.
Yeah, that's certainly helpful. Thank you so much, Pak. And I think that certainly is linked to how in recent years we have seen incremental developments in this regard. The government has made a lot of effort in making sure that we have addressed these issues domestically, which we can see from various regulations which have been developed in recent years, as well as how we have constantly been an active participants in multiple multilateral forums. And I think that the last question is, of course, sort of related to the next one. The next question is from Lutfi, who asks, if ASEAN were to put forward one priority to accelerate the cooperation in the cybersecurity aspect, what should it be? And of course, bear in mind that we are going to kickstart our ASEAN chairmanship, Indonesia, in 2033. How do you see Indonesia will fare in addressing cybersecurity issues, especially as you mentioned before, Singapore during its 2018 chairmanship have greatly invested in a lot of efforts in this regard. And so I think I will hand it to Bart to address these questions. Bart, please, if you may.
Well, I should be the last one suggesting things for Indonesia to do within ASEAN, but regardless of that, I think that's a really interesting question in terms of kind of trying to look what Indonesia, in its role as chairman of ASEAN and also in chair of the ASEAN Regional Forum, can kind of promote or kind of further bring forward. To me, I think it should be kind of, it should ideally build on, I think, what Indonesia really cares about. So what does Indonesia really care about in terms of cybersecurity or information security, and where has Indonesia certain things to share? What are its strengths? So I think that will be kind of my initial starting point. I mean, also related to, I think, the previous question, what has Indonesia learned from a series of cybersecurity incidents over the past year? I believe there was a major data breach or a few data breaches earlier this year, which kind of instantly kind of pushed forward a data security law that was in Parliament for a long time, and it was suddenly passed. Now, I think that in itself, kind of looking at data breaches and how government regulation deals with that, both on kind of the regulatory side, but also what do you do as a government in making sure that whether that's government entities, state-owned enterprises, or private enterprises employ kind of proper data security or information security standards as way of kind of doing their utmost to kind of make sure that personal identifiable data from citizens is in place. I think that's where definitely a role for ASEAN to play. I think that's not political enough to be too sensitive. I think it's not stepping on anyone's toes, and I think that really builds kind of the ASEAN 10 or soon the ASEAN 11 together, and where they can really make an effort, which is also connected to kind of the idea of this integrated digital market that the ASEAN member states are pushing. So again, I think it's building on kind of what Indonesia cares about and where Indonesia has something very tangible to share. And I think this around kind of data security is a really tangible one.
Sure. I think I really agree with the fact that I think we have to make sure that the domestic or what the constituents want have to be aligned with what we eventually develop at the multilateral level. And I think that's certainly important. But I also want to hear from Pak Ardi about this. So what do you see as Indonesia's potential contribution in this regard next year as an ASEAN chairman? Do you see that we will take a similar role that Singapore previously take in 2018, or what potential or what other scenarios do you potentially see next year?
Thank you for that question. I think this is a good opportunity. Yeah, becoming the chairman of ASEAN, Indonesia can really play a big role in shaping up the cybersecurity scene in the region. Yeah, of course, we have the biggest market, we have the biggest infrastructure. I mean, you name it. Being the largest countries within ASEAN, itself has its privilege. Yeah, so we have to also become an example how we manage our cybersecurity issues domestically, and of course, we promote during the G20, which I was part of the Digital Economic Working Group. Yeah, we have actually promoted the cross-border data interchange, exchange. But I don't know how that plays out. But I think we still want that to happen. in the future, especially within the context of ASEAN nations. Yeah, that itself is going to need to be pushed again. But of course, we have to work. We have to collaborate with the other ASEANs. We are actually working with Australia as well. On certain issues, how to manage a lot of the incidents, how to understand a lot of trainings now in the pipeline. Of course, we also work with the US, yeah, and also China. Basically, Indonesia would love to work with everyone who has an honest approach to really to curtail or manage a lot of these risks. I think it's not a country-centric issue, yeah, but it's a global issue. And the more partners that we can engage in working and enhance and our knowledge and knowledge sharing, I think is better for Indonesia as well as within the context of the ASEAN. I think that's my view.
Thank you, Pa. And I think that sparks like a curiosity for me myself, that understanding that Indonesia itself is such an active player in the multilateral settings. I am interested to hear how has Taiwan attempted, or how has Taiwan played its diplomatic card in making sure that it is able to engage other actors in ensuring its cybersecurity, especially at the global level. Understanding that Dr. Tseng, you previously mentioned about how Ukraine request to ICANN to pull Russia out of the TLDs. But in the previous years, there were a similar accident going on between Taiwan and China as well, wherein China withdrew from ICANN because of from the government advisory committee, to be exact, because Taiwan just joined. So in that case, what do you take to be the multilateral approach, or the diplomatic approach that Taiwan has taken to date?
In Taiwan, we did not treat that as a simple diplomatic issue. I think it's about global cyberspace governance issue. As I agree with all the speakers that the internet is global. So we did not stress too much regarding so-called internet sovereignty, because since it's borderless and it is by nature a matter of global governance. We will follow. We will go with the flow and follow every right step in the right direction. So in any internet forum, whether it is ICANN driven or it is UN driven, even though Taiwan is not part of the UN by this point of time, still we follow every step, every rule, and every norm. That's the way we behaved, and that's the way we will behave. And regarding if there's any behavior that has been perceived as a best practice, then we are willing to share, and we are willing to learn from all other friends and like-minded partners, and to get it improved. So that because as I say, Taiwan is a very unique case, pretty isolated in the international community. Yet we are not complaining to anybody. We are willing to contribute. That's how Minister Audrey Tang kept saying, reiterating in any international forum or regional forum. This is unfortunately this is the internet and the cybersecurity is a forum of is a kind of a epistemic community. So it's not just the state government, state official that can have a say. Everybody, multi-stakeholder can have a say. So that's the way we will continue our contribution to the world.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Tseng, for your for the insight. And I think that wraps up the Q&A section, but I think we have a few minutes left, so I would just like to give the last question. Could you please give a short closing statement on what cybersecurity or cyber governance issue you wish to hear more about in public debates? And I think we can start with Pak Ardi to answer that question. Pak Ardi, you may, please.
Thank you. Good, good question. Yeah. But let me just sum up our discussion. Yeah. Of course, we all know that the internet and its technology that is being applied into the internet, it's something that's not, it's evolving, and that in terms of the timing, it's evolving every minute. So regulation, like I said earlier, is not the answer. Yeah. It's really the key to the whole thing is understanding what we are looking and facing is look from the highest view to understand. You don't have the highest view of the issues or the matters that you're facing, then it's going to be difficult to understand everything that to understand the whole issues that we are discussing. So my closing statement is we need to learn more about the technologies. Yeah, we need to talk more with collaborative with our partners and friends all over the world. Yeah, I don't think the internet is something that we can use as we talk about this is my domain and it's not like that. This is everybody's domain. Everybody use the internet. I think we have to really sit down and talk with one another. It's better to talk more, yeah, and communicate, yeah, rather than talk but no communication. This is what happened now. Everybody just talk, but actually no one is communicating in reality. This is the problem that we're facing when we talk about technology. That's why not many people have the ability to see the internet and its matters, its problem from the helicopter view. I think that's my closing statement.
I certainly agree, and I think all of the dialogues does not only need to occur at the policymaking level, but also among the public for sure. Dr. Tseng, could you please just jump in and maybe give a short closing statement on what cybersecurity or cyber governance issue you wish to hear more about in public debates, be it in Taiwan or in the Indo-Pacific or at the global level?
I think it's very important that the internet belongs to every global citizen and at this era, the netizen. So it is important for everybody. I agree that everybody should sit down and talk, but it's just not talk the talk, but to walk the walk. First thing first is to realize and figure out the real what it means to have internet or digital sovereignty. I think right now there's a confusion that European digital sovereignty, the digital sovereignty European Union has been raised is kind of different from the other countries' internet sovereignty. One is total control of people, of citizens, overseas citizens' opinions. The other is to protect citizens' human rights. And in Taiwan, we at the beginning also has encountered a kind of confusion. So I think that would be a very good topic for future for further discussion, the further debates, so that people can have a pick of their choice. It's not up to just any single entity to have a say regarding that. I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Tseng, for reminding us the importance of engaging as wide range of an actor as possible, and especially making sure that the approaches taken are centered around the citizens, around the humans as the constituents and as the users of the internet. And lastly, Bart, could you please give a short closing statement on what cybersecurity, cyber governance, or other relevant issues that you wish to hear more, or you think to date has yet to be discussed in public debates?
Yeah, great question. Thanks so much for that opportunity. I would probably just want to kind of circle back, I think, to the main topic of the webinar today. It's kind of cyber, and I think it is geopolitical in the international spheres. And I think there are two things that stand out to me. I think one is this idea that we still kind of need to work on and need to flesh out this idea of checks and balances. So there are certain entities that have authorities to engage in cybersecurity issues that have certain capabilities that sits within government, within the private sector, but also in the broader community. But that the system kind of oversight, these checks and balances, is, I think, still very much in flux. And kind of the more stakeholders like ourselves, like here represented on the call and joining in virtually, I think, are engaged in this debate and kind of are seriously kind of scrutinizing what's being said and what's being done. I think I'm very happy to see more of that in the conversations and the conversations in public. And that also relates to the issue of multi-stakeholder kind of engagement. I think some of the previous speakers mentioned that. It's often used kind of as a bit of a throwaway term. We do multi-stakeholderism, and therefore we can just go on as we go along. I think we still need to kind of probably reinvent that whole idea of what does multi-stakeholder engagement mean when we talk about cybersecurity issues that kind of transgress into the political, military, and in the international security domain, where communities like us, industries, companies should have a proper say, but also be able and willing to share what they see happening and what are their key concerns, and also what's the responsibility that they take in making sure that we all are safe and secure online. So those would be my 2 cents.
Thank you, Bart. And certainly, I think it's of course important to make sure that a lot of things about cybersecurity, surrounding cybersecurity, is still very much located within the gray area. And I think it's also important to make sure that future discussions on this regard are geared towards making sure that a lot of things are a lot more certain, a lot of things are a lot more reliable, in order to ensure that cybersecurity is able to sustain an international rules-based order. And with that, I think we can conclude our discussion today, which I believe offered new perspectives to our audience joining from YouTube. And of course, I personally wish, and I believe I speak for all the speakers as well, that this might motivate more people from Taiwan, Indonesia, Australia, Southeast Asia, and beyond to discuss about cybersecurity and its relevance in international politics. The Habibie Center would like to extend our gratitude to Mr. Parhogafin, Pak Ardi Suteja, and Dr. Sung Iswo for their participation on today's webinar. Thank you for participants joining from YouTube, and please look forward to our next Talking ASEAN webinar next month, which I'm sure will just be as exciting as today's discussion. And you can find more about the Habibie Center through our official Instagram, LinkedIn accounts, and websites. It has been a pleasure moderating today's webinar. Thank you, and see you on another webinar.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.